when you use inner HTML, that could be, you could put that any place. You could put it in a div, you could put it in a paragraph, etc. So you can replace things. And that's what inner HTML, for lack of better words, that's pretty much what it does, is it's a replacement type of thing. And they give you a couple of examples of that. Yeah, stupid example, but turning on this light and turning it off, you can see that with buttons, you know that. You can use it to change change HTML styles using CSS, and they show an example in there. All right, actually a couple of them, you can hide things, show things, etc. Nothing that's that new in there. The script tag, the key thing is what we're going to, it's not going to be probably as big a thing for us with what we're doing, but there's always been a disagreement over whether you should have the external JavaScript, and if you do have internal, should you put it in the head or should you put it in the body? All right. The advantage of putting it in the body is the head's already loaded, so you know that's in there. All right. And other people say no. The advantage of putting it in the head section is you've got all your stuff together. You've got all your link statements and everything else that should be there. I was always taught you should put it in the body at the very bottom of the body, right before the ending body tag. All right, if you're going to put it internally. Okay, but external, I mentioned this down towards the bottom of this slide. It separates your code, it makes it easier to maintain. And, it's interesting because we got into a discussion about that in the class this morning, and some people thought it made it harder to maintain because you have more files. And I get that, but at the same time, technically, it's making it easier to maintain. All right, now, again, like I said, not everybody agrees with that. All right, the inner HTML then we've already mentioned. If you do that, try it yourself. You can put anything you want in there, so it can be text, it can be numbers, etc. Document.write, we don't use that very often because what document.write does is it's designed to literally write stuff on a web page. And I guess you could probably think of a reason you might want to do that, but most people I think would tell you they couldn't think of a reason they wanted to do that. All right, notice it says if you do a document.write with nothing inside, it deletes all existing HTML that's on the page. Again, why would you do that? I don't know. All right, alerts, the console.log that's down near the bottom, we've talked about this before. You will be using console.log extensively. All right, so let's see. Next. Statements, nothing new in there. You know what a program is. You know what statements are. Semicolons, I've already been beating you over the head with that. You're going to use them. Okay. You may or may not have known that. If you go down about a third of the way, when separated by semicolons, multiple statements on one line are allowed. I don't know why you'd want to do that. You can, but I don't know why you'd want to do that. So, JavaScript is much more lenient with white space than like HTML is. Okay. We've already talked about, breaking stuff and using the /n as opposed to BR, so that stuff's in there. What code blocks are. Here's all the keywords, so if you want to see them, all right, they're shown in here. You may or may not have known this. I'm down into syntax now. JavaScript syntax defines two types of values, fixed values and variable values. Fixed are literals. First name, let first name equal Keegan. Keegan is a literal. We're not changing it. That is your first name. First name, if you change it to me, of course, it'd be Jeff. So that's a variable. That's all they're talking about here. Literals are literal values that don't change. All right. You know what a variable is. You know what operators are. Expressions, keywords, comments, identifiers. You know that JavaScript is case sensitive. People in the first year class have been already getting bit with that. Where they one guy today, not the exact same thing, but he called his CSS file styles.css, and then he referenced it as style.css without the S, and he asked another couple people, and they were like, no, there's nothing wrong with that. I don't know why it doesn't work. Why don't you go up and ask him? So he asked me, and I saw it right away, and I waited a second, but I told him, I said, he's like, oh, wow, and everybody does it, right? All right, single line comments versus multi-line comments, you know what those are. You know, you can comment stuff out if you need to do so. Okay, now here's the using, go down to the variables and look at the using let and const, all right? As it says, before 2015, var was basically all that was used. Const did not even exist, much less let, all right? So as it says, starting with 2015, you could use const. The weird thing with const, you know, again, you may care, you may not care, but I think at least this is the weird thing that what there was about const. You could use it, it would recognize it as a keyword, but you could change its value. You could say const age equal 21, and in the next line you could say age equal 22, and you didn't get an error. So it's like, why would you even use that? But now, as it says, it's set up for that, so. All right, assignment data types. Again, some of this we've already gone through, so. Down right near the bottom of this thing on the variables, variable names must begin with a letter or a $sign or an underscore. Again, you're best off, it explains in here about the $sign and the underscore, but you're still best off not using either one of those, just using letters and numbers and starting it with a letter. Right? Again, we just did this stuff yesterday with the assignment operators. I don't think it pays. Are there any of these operators you don't understand? All right, I mean, you've gone through it in here. You've also basically gone through it in the C# class as well. I mean, it was a little different, but it was the same general ideas. We talked about operator precedence already. If you go about 2/3 of the way down, you can see because they've got every operator that I can think of in there, and they show the precedence of them. Again, we just talked about plus equal, minus equal. We went through all that stuff. So in about 2 minutes, we'll hit the stuff that'll start to matter, or new stuff, I should say. Remember that JavaScript variables are dynamic, meaning that you can put a number in there and then the next line change it to a string if you want to do that. Okay, let's jump down to functions, and we'll just start there. I know, again, some of this will be review. In an ideal world, yeah, a function is a block of code designed to perform one task. All right, not everybody does it that way, but at least you should. So see, the thing is, and I've said this before, maybe I said it in your class last year, one of your classes, but if I'm inputting person's name, first name, last name, address, city, state, zip, 10 pieces of information, probably going to do it in one function. All right, but technically what they're saying here is you should do it in 10 different functions. All right, the function syntax for a regular function is shown there. There's nothing new there. When you call a function, it's known as function invocation. Functions always return something, but if you give it nothing, it returns basically the empty string. All right. You use functions for code reuse. When you want to call a function, you have to use the parentheses. They may or may not contain a parameter. Now go down, if you would, a little more than halfway down here, where it says functions used as variable values. See that? All right. So as it says, instead of using a variable to store the return value of the function, you can use the function directly. All right. And people always say, I mean, is there a really big advantage to doing this? To me, the disadvantage of doing it is the first way they show it is the way you do it in most every other programming language. All right. So that makes it a disadvantage to do it that way here. Supposedly, the invocation is it goes faster, and it makes your program run faster, because if you look here in the first example, we've got two variables, And so it has to go and create both variables and allocate space for those variables. And really, there's only one variable in the second one. All right. Fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of the stuff that's done that we'll do in the Node.js is done the second way. All right. Variables declared within a function become local to the function. All right. Objects, again, some of this stuff we have talked about already, but that said, some of it we haven't because if you remember at the end of the semester, we didn't have very much time left. And I very quickly went over the stuff at the end of the book, but it was like in one class period. I covered several chapters, so we didn't really get any of it. All right. Please take a look though and go down right near the top. Do you see where it says var char equals, and then in parentheses it's got type :fiat model. You see all that stuff? All right. What you're really doing there, yeah, it's an object, but really it's a JSON object. What you're going to see in about 2 weeks from now when we get into this in earnest or whatever you want to call it, usually you'll say, just like that, you'll say var char equal, you'll have a curly brace, then on the next line you'll put type :fiat comma, then on the next line you'll have model :500 comma, then on the next line you'll have color :white, then on the next line you'll have curly brace semicolon. Just so you know, that's normal. It's not that you have to do it that way. All right. In fact, we're going to do something that's not that different from this when we start. We're going to create some REST APIs, and they'll be very simple. We won't use any of the tools that are built in. We'll just do it, and you'll see, and you'll be like, okay, that's fine, it works. But it's like, yeah, but now we can make it work well. Okay. All right. So again, they're saying you define a JavaScript object with it. You can with an object literal, so we already said that. Hopefully you see that one about a third of the way down that it says var person equals and all that other stuff. Then underneath it, it's what I just showed you. It says typically you do it like this. All right. Remember when we were in the C# class that we did classes, and classes contain methods, which are functions in a class, and properties. Well, here's some properties that they're talking about right here. And just like we did in the C# class, you access those properties via the name of the object dot the name of the property. If you don't want to do it that way, can you see that where they show the other way of doing it? Where it says object name and it's got it inside of braces. All right. You can do that. I can't think really of anybody that I've ever seen that does, but look at the examples that are underneath it. If you do it the first way with the dot syntax, you don't need the double quotes for the variable name. And to me, it's just more natural to write it the first way. You almost always see it that way. All right. I mean, you can't say nothing with 100% certainty, but virtually always you'll see it done that way. All right. Then they show some methods. Notice the example. Can you see this right up above where it says the this keyword? Can you see where I am? It's about 2/3 of the way down. I'm on the objects page. All right. If you do it like that, and you basically you can create a function right inside, as they show right there. Okay. So the this keyword, as it says, refers to the owner of the function. It typically refers to whatever it is you're working with. All right. So do not declare strings, numbers, and Booleans as objects. Yeah, because they're simple data types, so you wouldn't do that anyway. All right. I'm down to the next, or up to the next page, talking about events. And as it says, an event is something that happens in the program. JavaScript will react to any event, but you have to code it. So by default, I can create a button, but if I don't put code in there and I click the button, nothing will happen, right? All right. I can write JavaScript where if I take my mouse and I move it over a field, I can change its color or its size or whatever. That's all event handling code that does that. as it says, an event can be something the browser does or something the user does. This stuff that's in here actually is important. All right, so if you look at that first example, okay, and what it's doing in there, it says the time is, I'm going to grab that example and just run it, and it says it's got today's date and today's time in it. All right, now the fact that it's got the date and time doesn't mean diddly, but the fact is you're bringing interactivity in. All right, and the way that this is working is you're clicking the button. So in other words, what it's referred to is you have to wire up the button so that it'll react to this. You can do it with onClick. As you start writing more sophisticated code, you wouldn't want to put all the code right there, in the name of the button .onClick. So there's better ways of doing it. Some of the common events for working with this stuff are shown here in near the a little farther down, and it's got on change, on click, etc. And as you can already notice, they all start with on. And it's not a complete list, as it says right there. You can click below. I'm not going to do it. All right. So what can JavaScript do? Anything you want it to do, almost. All right. What we're going to do, I'm going to tell you this, and you got to tell me whether or not this makes sense or it doesn't make sense. All right. We're going to be working with what are called APIs, Application Programming Interface. Virtually every company of any kind of size has got an API. For instance, Facebook has got an API. Okay? Maybe you wanted to write your own application where you could put in a person's name and it would immediately bring up for you everything about that person, all their public texts, all their everything. It's kind of like they do if you do a search, but you could refine it to make it do anything that you wanted it to do. And the thing is, when you start working with this stuff, when you start working with APIs, when you think about it, it's CRUD. And what I mean is there's 4 things you can do. You can look at stuff on an API. You can add new stuff to an API. You can change existing stuff in an API. And you can remove stuff in an API. That's it. That's what the rest of the class, believe it or not, is about. So for instance, one of the first ones that we're going to write is we're going to go out and use an application for the stock exchange. And then we'll make a really very simple, pretty ugly really, little interface, but we'll have a nav bar in it where you can put, have a search box in it. You can put in Apple. Click search, it'll bring up all the information we want regarding Apple. All right, you can do it again and do Facebook, etc. And then we'll talk about how you can take an API like that and and maybe when you're done, you want to save all that information. So you write it out to a database. That's what a lot of the rest of the class is going to be about. All right. About halfway down on the thing on strings, which is next, it says strings can be objects. Technically, strings are objects. All right. And how do I know that? Because look how you can go and create a new string object. One of the ways you can do it is you can say var y equals new string John. Now that's not as easy as saying var y equals John, but you could do it that way. All right, they're going to run in then and start talking about some of the string methods that you would use most often. String length, you hopefully know already. The substring and index of, I have talked about before. We have looked at them a little bit, but I will tell you that any programmer that's going to be doing a lot of string manipulation has to be comfortable and familiar with whatever string, substring type of methods are available in that language, period. Strings, basically, when it does all that work, they're arrays. So in other words, they start at position 0. There is slice and splice and all that other stuff is in here. There's a string replace. if you ever want to or need to do that. There's two upper and lower. There's a concat. There's trim. That actually, believe it or not, it may not sound like a big thing. You know what the trim function is, how it removes beginning spaces and ending spaces. Up until a few years ago, it was before 2015, but probably up till about 10 years ago, JavaScript had an rtrim function, which removed all the stuff on the right, and an ltrim function, which removed all the stuff on the left. But it didn't have a trim function, which removed them both, so you had to write your own. Charat we've worked with before down near the bottom of the string methods. You should be familiar with that. We did like a charat where you check the first character. You want to run the program again. You'd uppercase it and check it, and if it was an uppercase Y, you'd run it again, type of an example. You can use the split command down to the bottom of this, and as it says, that'll convert an array into a string. All right, literally, it splits it up. You can go the other way too. In some, not in this language, but in some languages, they call it explode and implode. When you explode, you're taking a string and making it into an array. When you explode, you're taking an array and making it into a string. All right. Numbers, I'm sure there's nothing new in there. They're always 64-bit. The number methods, toString you already know about. The toExponential you'll probably never use. Do you remember toFixed? If you want to put a certain number of decimal places on something? Yeah. All right. Value of is kind of important. As it says, it returns the number as a number. Okay. Convert variables, numbers, global methods, parse float and parse int, had them already. All right. So there's examples of both of those in there. Infinity, positive and negative, NaN. Again, we just talked about this yesterday. Notice there's a complete number reference, so if you do want more, probably don't, but if you ever would, you can go there. All right, arrays are next. There's the easiest way to create an array if you want to pre-fill it with values. You can also say varchars equals new array paren, or you can say var chars equal bracket like they have there, and then fill it up one at a time. You can do it any way. An array really is a data structure because it allows you to hold more than one value at a time. Okay. You could put the stuff over multiple lines and they show you that. The new keyword is shown about a third of the way down. Arrays are objects. They have many properties such as the length property, which is halfway down on this. Remember they're zero base, so the first element is element 0. All right. They show looping through here. It's halfway down on the JS Arrays page, and they use a simple for loop. There are many types of for loops that you can use. JavaScript also supports associative arrays. The example that you see the example here under associative arrays, it stinks. It's a terrible example. What an associative array means is where they have in there, for example, when you set that up, where you've got person 0 equals John, etc. The one I always use are like states, where you could say state, and then you could put in the brackets there, MO equals double quote Missouri double quote. You could do it like that. That's a true associative array. So what that's basically saying, it says in JavaScript arrays always use numbered indexes. There are ways around that where you don't have to. They show that later on. All right, if you take a look a little later. All right. As far as the array methods, which is the next one there, converting arrays to strings, the toString, we already talked about that. Pop and push, all right, you should at least know what they are, okay? As it says, pop items out of an array, push items into an array. All right, when you pop, you grab the last one. When you push, you add a new one to the end. There's also shift and unshift. Shift removes the first element, all right? And as it says, it shifts everything else accordingly. And unshift adds to the beginning of the array, as opposed to push, which adds it to the end of the array, all right? I mean, sometimes that really and truly is important. Sort, we have worked with before. You've worked with sort. Okay. As it says, there's sort and there's reverse. Okay. Yeah, numeric sort, etc. Okay. There is a compare function. This is kind of interesting. If you go down about a third of the way, I'm under the JS array sort, and I'm about a third of the way down on that page, and it says the compare function. Can you see that? Okay, the reason I'm telling you that, see where it says function A, B, return A minus B? See that? Mm-hmm. That's basically, that's how sorting is done in ascending order. If you, instead of saying, if you have it just like that, where it says function A comma B, return B minus A, it puts it in descending order. All right? And they explain all that in here. Highest and lowest numbers that are in an array. There's different ways that you can do that. It's kind of a neat example that they give there because they sort it. And first they sort it in, you know, it's like if you sort it in ascending order, the 0th will have the lowest and length minus 1 will have the highest. Okay? There is a math.max function that they show there. As it says, you can use it to find the highest number in an array. All right, so there's a lot of different ways this stuff can be used. All right. Array iterations as we jump down to the next one here. This is kind of important because you will use some of this stuff. So notice there is a for each. As it says, it calls a method. There's that word again. It's a callback function. So in other words, it's going to call the same function for each element in the array. So let's say that what you wanted to do was for each element in an array, you wanted to, when the element came, you wanted to double it, for, you know, multiply it by 2 type of thing. So then you could call a callback function to do that. So instead, instead of 1, 2, 3, it would be what? 2, 4, 6 type of thing. And that's pretty much the examples that they give in there. All right, then underneath that, they've got array.map. Notice it says it creates a new array by performing a function on each array element. It's similar to what we did before, but what we did before will change the original array. This will not. This will create a new array. And it may sound like some of the stuff I'm going through here with you, it's like, yeah, that's fine. Either I know it already or who cares. But if you ever plan on applying for a job as a web developer, they're going to expect that you know this stuff. Not necessarily that you remember, this, here's the syntax, but what it is. All right. There's a filter method. As it says, it creates a new array with elements that pass a test. So an example might be, if you had an array of random numbers and you wanted every number that was greater than or less than another number, or every odd number or every even number, for example, you could use that. There is a reduce method. This is fairly new. As it says, it runs a function on each array to produce or reduce it as a single value. All right. So I'm going to do the try it yourself on that. And you're passing in 45, 4, 9, 16, and 25. It's going to add them all up and just give you back the addition of all of them. But the reduce function is pretty new, and it's actually something that you're going to, I would at least think you're going to see it again in what we're doing. There's reduces. There's an every. As it says, it checks if all array of values pass a test. There's a sum that says, do some values pass the test? All right, there's an index of that'll search an array, and it'll tell you if something is there and what position it's in. And by default, it finds the first one, but there's a last index of which searches from the back to the front, and it'll find the last one that's in there. There's find, which, as it says right there, returns the value of the first array element that passes some kind of a test. Index, which does the same thing, but it gives you the index of that. Dates, I don't think there's really much of anything we have to talk about in here. You may hear of the term with dates. With a lot of programs, it doesn't happen like this in JavaScript, but with a lot of programs, if you ask for a new date object and you print it out, you get this god-awful number. It's the number of milliseconds since January 1st, 1970. That's got some historical significance. It's called the Unix Epoch date. And what happens is that's how it typically stores it, is in this huge number. And then you can run different kinds of date methods on it to get, whatever you want out of it. By default, when you do a new date, it gives you the date and it gives you the time. I don't think we have to run over dates, any of that stuff. The date get methods and the get sets. Just remember, if you pull up where it says JS date get methods, just remember this, that when we get to the point where we're in JavaScript, you're going to be doing getters and setters. I mentioned that to you before. So there's some get stuff there, followed by some set stuff. That's all fine and dandy. All right, let's just jump down and look at math. There is a math object, and what that means is the math object is a class. It's a math class, and it's got a bunch of built-in stuff that you can use if you want to or need to. Things like rounding, the power thing I mentioned yesterday, getting a square root, absolute value. The ceiling and the floor are important. So 99.6, if I asked for the ceiling, it would give me 100. All right, if it was negative 99.6 and I asked for the ceiling, it wouldn't give me negative 100, it would give me negative 99, because negative 99 is more than negative 100. Floor is just the opposite. The rest of the stuff that's in there, sine, cosine, etc., you're probably not going to use those. So min and max we talked a little bit about, but it'll give you the lowest or the highest value of a list of arguments, and you can even pass an array to that. All right. Random will give you a random number. You know that because we've done that before. The math object methods are shown then on the bottom of this, and there's even a math reference. It's funny because I've got a couple people in the first year class. I'm not saying they're struggling, but with some of the questions they're asking, I kind of think they might be. So when I started out today, I went over everything that we've done thus far, and I showed them W3 schools, and I said, now this would be the stuff that we've gone over so far. And I did it for both the HTML thing and the CSS thing. People just don't like to go out and look at stuff like that, I guess. Random we've already looked at, so Booleans, you know that a Boolean is true or false. There's really nothing much more to say about it than that. All right, I did mention to you that in JavaScript, they talk about values being truthy or falsy, I guess. And if something is truthy, it means, that it's easier to say if something is falsy. It's 0, -0, the empty string, I think null and undefined. Everything else is truth. Comparison operators, again, we've hit on those already. Logical operators, there's nothing in there you don't already know. Conditions, you know conditional statements, you know how to use an if, you know how to use a switch. All right. JavaScript for loop, you know how to use a for loop, you know how to use a while loop, you know what the break statement is. I think you know, am I right in assuming you know all that stuff? All right. So, type conversion, we talked a little bit about this yesterday. says in JavaScript there are 5 different data types that can contain values, and they show you them there: string, number, Boolean, object, and function, and there's 6 types of objects. The most generic object is type object. It can literally hold just about anything. You could run type of, and they show you examples there, and it'll tell you what you have. Again, I mentioned this to you before. Notice that, well, they don't show an example, but the second one there says type of, and they've got pi 3.14, and it says return number. Even if it was just 3, it would also return number. All right, so it doesn't distinguish between ints and floats. There's a lot of conversions you can do if you work your way down on this type conversion thing here. They mention that you can convert numbers to strings, you can convert Booleans to strings, dates to strings, strings to numbers, etc. So there's a lot of stuff. Typically, if you want to do something, you can. Sometimes the computer will get confused, as you'd probably guess. Like, you can't really convert, for example, a Boolean to, well, technically a Boolean, if you wanted to convert it to a number, true would be anything but 0. All right. Bitwise, I'm just going to skip. We did a little bit of work, you may remember, in the C# class. We did a program or two with regular expressions, and I even talked to you about regular expressions. You work with search patterns. All right, and it allows you to see if something exists inside of something else. So you put the pattern in, all right, and there's some examples. There's a var string search with a regular expression. About a third of the way down, nothing really new there. All right, so there are different things that you can use with this. I don't think we're going to do much work with this. I'm trying to think of, in my head, is there something we'd use this for? Probably not very much, if anything. Let's finish this part of it. We'll get up to the JS forms and we'll take a break. All right. Errors, throw, and try to catch. Well, you've already done try catches in C#. Do you remember that? You could do the same type of thing in JavaScript. But a third of the way, not even, down it says the try statement allows you to attempt to do a block of code and test it for errors while it's being executed. The catch allows you to make one or more code blocks that if it comes up with an error, it'll, and if you're handling it, it'll do whatever it is you want it to do. The example they have there shows only one catch. There can be multiple catches. There is a throw statement that you can, JavaScript throws with an S. You throw without an S. Did you hear that? Because it's like that in any language that allows try-catch. The system throws errors. You throw an error. There's an input validation example about a third of the way down. You're checking to see if something is numeric or not, and you're supposed to be entering something between 5 and 10. So first it checks to see, and if you put in something that's empty, it throws the word empty. If you put in non-numeric, it says not a number. Otherwise, if you get down to where it says x equal number of x, you know that it's a number. So it's less than 5, you say too low. Greater than 10, you say too high. Otherwise, it goes through. All right. I mean, it's a pretty simple example. The finally statement that they show there, finally always runs. So you do a try catch. Everything in your try succeeds. So you skip the catch, but you still do the finally. You do a try catch. You go partway through and there is an error. You don't do any more of the try. You go in and do the catch, but you still do the finally. There is an actual error object that you have in JavaScript about halfway down. As it says, it provides error information. So you can say error.name or error.message. There's different kinds of errors, and you can see those right there. I'm not going to read it to you, but you can see them. 6 of them that are shown there, and then each one is explained afterwards. They even have an error reference down at the bottom if you wanted to ever go and take a look at that. All right. Scope, we've talked a little bit about this before. Local variables, when you define a variable inside of a routine, all right, it's local to that routine. Global variables are defined outside of any routine, and there's examples of each. If you assign a variable to a value that has not been declared, it automatically becomes global. What the heck does that mean? Can you see this halfway down where it says automatically global? This is what I mentioned to you yesterday. And that is, notice they have created in this function that's called my function, it says car name equal Volvo. You see that? Mm-hmm. If that variable has not been defined previously, no var, no let, no const, it now exists there, but since it doesn't have a var or let or const, it's now automatically global. Another reason that you always want to use useStrict to force you to use let or var or const. Strict mode is next. We've talked about that before. Again, the lifetime of Java variables right at the bottom. As it says, it starts when it's declared. Local variables are deleted when the function stops. All right, globals are deleted when you close your window. Hoisting, and this is one of the ones I mentioned that you should take a look at, it says it's JavaScript's default variables of moving declarations to the top. I'm just going to put it real simple to you. Let's say that I've got two functions in my program, okay? And on the top, I've got a function called function2, and it does a bunch of junk. I don't care what it is. Then I got function1 underneath that, and function1 right at the bottom calls function2. Are you with me? Mm-hmm. All right. Hoisting means it doesn't matter the order in which you put those. That's what hoisting means. JavaScript's got a lot of stuff built into it so that it understands, oh, if it hasn't been defined yet, all right, look down below and see if it'll be defined. And if, or vice versa. That's what they're talking about. Let and const is in there. Again, please read that. All right, under the hoisting, about halfway down. All right, using a letter const before it's declared results in a reference error. That's another reason, again, you want that use strict. You just want to use good coding practice. It says there, declare your variables at the top. Well, again, the only bad thing about declaring your variables at the top is if you do that, then everything becomes global. If that's not a big thing, if you have just a few variables, but if you've got hundreds of variables and you make everything global, or if you got a lot of really big arrays and you make everything global, they stick around for the life of the program. And if it's a long program, that can slow down, all right, processing time. The use strict thing by itself is next. As it says, it's new in ECMA version 5. It's a literal expression. It indicates the code should be executed in strict mode. Notice what it says. You can't use undeclared variables. That's the big thing about it. All right, so you put use strict up on top in double quotes. If you've got 10 files in a program, technically you should put use strict at the top of each one. If you've got 10 functions in one program, you only need it once. So about a third of the way down, it says why strict mode. You read it yourselves, but again, more secure code. What you're doing is, since JavaScript allows you to be so lax, putting it in strict mode means it's less lax, more than anything else. That's what you're doing. All right. This keyword is next. Okay, as it says, the JavaScript, this keyword refers to the object that it belongs to. And then there's a whole big thing in yellow there. Can you see that? All right. Sometimes you don't need to use the word this. Sometimes you need to use the word this. Sometimes if you try to use the word this, you confuse the system and it doesn't know what it is you're trying to do. And we've got let. We've already mentioned let. think there's anything new in there. Let means that the variable is available in whatever block you created it. All right. Const, talked about that too. As it says, ECMA 2015 gave you let and const. All right, variables defined with const behave like let, except they can't be reassigned. They can have a different value in there, though, depending if you're working with an object. They can have a different value inside of them. And that's about, you go down about a third of the way, it says constant objects can change. That's what you're going to be working with almost exclusively in Node. All right. I'll tell you what, it's a little early. Let's take 10 minutes. All right. And we'll pick it up at this arrow function that's right here. We'll pick it up there. It's 122. We'll pick it up at 132.